The best quote that captures me before I took this class was one written in an article by Street. A surprising number of general arguments about society, language, and thought appear to rest upon claims made, whether implicitly or explicitly, regarding the nature of literacy. It is assumed that we know what literacy is and can therefore appeal to it in the resolution of more uncertain areas of knowledge. I initially thought that literacy was pure reading and writing, encoding and decoding. As for multiliteracies, I thought the concept was the same but through multimodal means, mainly sound and visuals and text. In other words, I thought I knew what literacy was and, in an unintended result, thought I knew a little bit more about how the world worked than I did. However, this class has really opened my eyes to the multifaceted nature of literacy. I guess you could say that I was seeing literacy in an autonomous lens as defined in another quote by Street. I shall deal firstly with the autonomous model. The model assumes a single direction in which literacy development can be traced and associates it with progress, civilization, individual liberty, and social mobility. It attempts to distinguish literacy from schooling. It isolates literacy as an independent variable and then claims to be able to study its consequences. These consequences are classically represented in terms of economic takeoff or in terms of cognitive skills. I believed that literacy kind of stood on its own and was one of many necessary steps to success. But upon learning more about literacy and how it functions, I would like to take a more ideological stance towards literacy, which is defined in this way. Against these assumptions, I shall pose an ideological model of literacy. Those who subscribe to this model concentrate on the specific social practices of reading and writing. They recognize the ideological and therefore culturally embedded nature of such practices. The model stresses the significance of the socialization process in the construction of the meaning of literacy for participants and is therefore concerned with the general social institutions through which this process takes place and not just the explicit educational ones. In other words, literacy is steeped in the context that surrounds it. There is no detaching literacy from our socially constructed worlds that are based on the interactions we have with each other. As we progressed through this semester, I saw many examples of how literacy is a social construction. In an article by Delpit, who was looking at the silence dialogue, or the implicit power structures created by antiquated views of literacy, there is an answer to how we can combat the autonomous model. I believe the answer to these questions lies in ethnographic analysis, that is, in identifying and giving voice to alternative worldviews. One worldview that we looked at was described in an article by Jackson and DeLon. This looked at literacy from a Native American point of view and how it directly undermined the literacy of the dominant culture in the United States. The stories the natives tell are said, from the point of view of the author, to decolonize our academic understandings of community writing by asking us to participate as community listeners, co-engaged in making meaning from them. What possible meanings we hear in them depends on how we listen transrhetorically to the stories and to each other in understanding them together. These stories ask us to consider how and where we extend them and to whom we tell them. Who we are depends upon listening as a community to storied landscape rather than the settled landscape. Here, we can see the ideological view of literacy at work. Meaning is a social construction, and the social construction differs from the social construction of the white culture, which believes in the settled landscape over the storied landscape. Thus, what happens is, these are the stories she tells when I ask her to explain resistance. Resistance is not always explicit, like in marches. Rather, it can be in something as subtle as the telling of a story that implicitly undermines what is attempting to oppress it. This demonstrates that literacy does not stand alone. It is not separate from the world, and it is not a measurement of intelligence based on white standards. Rather, it can be a form of social justice as it is suspended by the many strings that construct the social world. Another example was in an article authored by De Los Rios and Molina, which talks about the oppression of the Latinx community and the pushback created by the celebrations associated with posadas. De Los Rios and Molina offer the notion of Latinx immigrant social movements, specifically posadas, as literacy itself, a vehicle through which young people critically read and write themselves into the world, and as a means by which educators can mobilize students' politicized cultural data sets for learning. Part of the way it is a literacy is that the central metaphor of Mary, Joseph, and baby Jesus seeking refuge is replaced with immigrants seeking sanctuary and human rights in the United States. This metaphor was created out of the social context in which it exists. While the metaphor can influence those who are inside of it, those who are inside of it also recreate it constantly depending on the needs of that time. Overall, I learned a lot from this course this semester, and I hope to continue to see more examples of all of the different types of literacies in the world. In my teaching, I think it's important to understand something from the point of view of another person rather than to try to understand somebody from within our own outside perspective. A large part of learning is to learn about the different contexts and histories and values that comprise the lives of different kinds of people, and that's what I hope to teach and instill in students in the coming years. So it's not that encoding and decoding are bad or wrong. It's just that what shapes the word choice and the style of literacy in any mode is what is important.